Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to add something on the role of what Jens said, the role of the researcher and ending up in a debate, ending up in a fight. I think we might choose the certain formats, the certain media genres in which we want to intervene. Maybe the selection, being selective, is one of the solutions. Maybe go for public service media programs rather than for commercial programs where the media logic is kind of black and white, you know. And I noticed also that it's most a problem in small countries because the journalists don't do a proper job, actually. I mean, newsrooms are really small. Even if I compare to the Netherlands with Flanders, the Netherlands is 3 times bigger in population, and also newsrooms. So there, you were not asked so many times for an opinion. Whereas in Flanders, you constantly ask for an opinion, and that's the danger, I think. So it's just sometimes very mundane, the reason why you end up being labeled in a camp. So you have to be very selective, I think. That's one of the possibilities to stay sachlich and stick to what you know and the facts and not end up in opinion camps. Immediate, thank you for inviting me. I will briefly present the project, the consortium. It's a Belgian project, so that's very different from yours. It's not so much about comparison between different countries, it's more about comparison within the different communities and regions in the country. As you know, Belgium is for the longest time no longer a unitary country. It's very much divided since the 1970s with constitutional reforms. Immigration remains a national, federal responsibility, but integration is a very regional one. So you have Brussels capital region, you have the Flemish part of the country, which is at the north of the country, 6 million people, and then you have the south of the country, which is the francophone part. The media are different, the orientations towards different countries are different. The francophone Belgians look at France, look at assimilationist policies, and the Flemish very much look at the Dutch situation, but are a little bit more lenient, so to speak. So they're in between a more multiculturalist and integrationist approach, whereas the francophone part is much more into integrationist, assimilationist, so inspired by the French model. That's only one difference. So you can see it's about images of immigrants, so we do content analysis, we also do mental representation, so we look at what people think, what the majority thinks, the Belgians think about migrants, refugees, asylum seekers. And then we also look at are there any effects, is there any impact on the frames being used, on the representations being chosen. Does it matter what kind of media agenda you have, what kind of media you use? Are you more into online or more into a mixture of online or online media, or more into public versus commercial media? Does it matter for your overall attitude, your overall perceptions of this particular issue? It was funded by the Belgian research agency. I mention it because we have very little money. So in terms of the generosity of the subsidizer, we had 650,000 euros, so we have to put everything into perspective. Your project is much larger, takes more time. We only got 2 years, so basically we work with mostly postdocs, short-term contracts, and there's only a few disciplines, a few areas of science that are being financed still at the Belgian level, and social sciences is one of them. Leuven is the coordinator. What is the goal? So the goal is to inventory the multiple public policy and media voices heard in Belgium on the issue of migration while learning from practices abroad. So there is a focus on Sweden, but it's never a full-fledged comparison that we aim for, because the partner in Halmstad University, Emma Sunden, just got barely 50,000 euros. So, you know, all the different work packages cannot be met with a Swedish response, for that matter. So there's a few reasons. I'll try to explain why we chose Sweden, looking at some indicators, some cultural indicators, some real-world indicators, indicators also of the world's journalism study. But it's not a comparison. The comparative element is really within the country. What is it? What is the situation in Flanders? What is the situation in Brussels? And what is the situation in Wallonia? Different stakeholders, different methods also, some media content with regard to journalism culture, study of societal reactions of the general public in an online survey that we did also in Sweden. So I'll show a few differences and a few similarities there. The study of push and pull factors in migration from a refugee perspective, so that's maybe different from your initiative. We also ask what the refugees themselves think of the representation in the media. And we also ask why they are in Belgium and what are the different integration infrastructures in place in the north of the country, in Brussels and in Wallonia. Because we have a north-south issue in Belgium. I mean, the south is known to be poorer than the north, but the north is known to be colder than the south, in a way, you know, to put it in a nutshell. So, how do they react to this? Is there a change is there a difference in their reactions? And then also linking it to what has just been said by Justin. Valorization. What do we give back to the public? What do we give back to society? Valorization is very important for BRAIN BE, for the Belgian Research Agency. So we have to come up with our results, our research results, our workshops we did with refugees, the artistic photo elicitation workshops that we organized, and put it in some sort of an exhibit. An exhibit that will be showcased in schools, in hospitals, in public arenas, maybe in stations. So each of the partners in the north and the south of the country, 7 partners in total, well 6 actually, Belgian ones, will need to think of how to give the results back to society, to a broader audience, be it children in a school or just broader audience in public arenas. So these are the partners: Leuven, Université Catholique de Louvain, VUB, Université Libre de Bruxelles, and then Halmstad. So this is where we are almost here now. We are more or less in the 10th month. So that means you can see that we still have to do a lot on policy analysis. Here the policy analysis will start later in the year. As I said, we only have 24 months, so we did already our content analysis partly, so I will again only focus on 2015, but we have already data on 2016 and 17. We also have data on the television news, so not only the press, so if you want to share the code book, that might be one way to collaborate if you find it interesting. So people are now coding actually television content. We selected 10 key moments over these 3 years. Today I'll only talk, when I talk about the content analysis, on July until August, September 2015, the height of the migration issue, the refugee issue. So first, the first work package. Why did we choose Sweden? Well, different real-world indicators. Already in 2014, when you look at 100,000 Swedes, 8 are refugees. In Belgium, it's 2 on 100,000, so it's a different indicator there. Same size, more or less, 10 million, 11 million people. Other indicators that were very different. We departed from the cultivation analysis. Media portrayals do matter, have a potential influence on public opinion, so that media can choose to be inclusive or exclusive, connect people or sharpen the differences. So therefore, the Swedish and the Belgian case might be interesting to examine in terms of differences and similarities. We looked at the Migration Integration Policy Index. You might be very critical, of course, of all of these indices. We just chose them to work on a rationale for our comparison. Sweden is number 1 out of 38 countries on the Migration Integration Policy Index. Belgium ranks 7. And has to do with access to rationality. As you know, it's about policy documents, a written policy with regard to application, family reunion, permanent residence. Then there's the Eurobarometer data. We have seen already some of them yesterday. Sweden seems to be, out of the 28 EU member countries, the only country with predominantly positive feelings about non-EU migrants, 62%. Cultural indicators, Hofstede, for instance. You might be very critical about Hofstede, but it can be useful. They seem to be, notwithstanding all the criticisms, quite stable. So uncertainty avoidance, that was one of the 4 or one of the 5 indicators where Belgium was very different. The discrepancy was the highest between the 2 countries. So Belgians are very uncertainty avoiding. We saw that also in our EU case data. For instance, Belgian parents are extremely paranoid about all the risks that children may or might encounter on the internet. Very different from other parents, Dutch parents or the Swedish parents for that matter. There's also the Emancipated Value Index, part of a set of indicators, part of the Global Values Survey. There Sweden ranks a lot higher than Belgium too. It has to do with autonomy in the family, for instance, the child's voice, for instance. The voice has to do with other things like when you are expressing your political affiliation in these elections, equality, gender equality, choice. So these are sub-indicators that are very different. So just to show you in what way Sweden and Belgium are to be seen as extreme cases. And then also the journalistic culture. How Swedish journalists see themselves differently as promoting tolerance. The Belgian journalists don't see themselves like that at all. Very different role perception. And within Belgium, we see that the Francophone ones, the French language ones, see them more as positive towards promoting tolerance, constructionist, journalistic kind of practices, rather than the Flemish ones. The Flemish stick to the continental model, impartiality, independence, not engagé, kind of involved kind of journalism. So content analysis, 10 periods, only one will be discussed today, but we have highlighted 10 different periods in the 3 years. As I said, there is another visual code book, and these are the hypotheses, some of them, I just selected a few. I'll go through it quickly. So immigration figures levels, we hypothesized that they would be more often mentioned and discussed in the Belgian press than in the Swedish press. Figures, more emphasis on numbers than in the Swedish press. The second hypothesis, Swedish newspapers report more on the positive aspects, the welcoming reactions, both in civil society and politics, more on rights for refugees, more on the humanitarian dimensions of the refugee debate, more on success stories of refugees, more on post-arrival integration. So positive elements rather than Belgian newspapers who stick to the more negative elements, more gender equality in the Swedish newspapers, more gender balance, less inequality between males and females representations. Fifth hypothesis, refugees are less often quoted than other actors in news articles on the refugee crisis. We talked about it yesterday with some maybe unexpected results coming out from the 3-country study. Seventh hypothesis, refugees are primarily presented as a collectivity, as a group rather than as individuals, and we wanted to test in that respect the person positivity hypothesis. Articles tend to be more positive when you deal with individuals, articles tend to be more negative when you deal with groups. Only 900 articles for now, but we'll have many more when we look at the 3 years. You see the selection of a popular and a qualitative newspaper, 2 in each of the regions, countries, so 6 in total. When we look at the results, a lot of hypotheses are confirmed. Immigration figures and immigration levels are more often mentioned and discussed in the Belgian press. Yes, you see the percentages, so that first hypothesis is confirmed. More positive reactions, dealing with welcoming civil society reactions. So that was the case in Sweden, definitely. So the green sign shows or refers to indeed a significant difference, but no statistical differences for success stories. We didn't come across more success stories in the Swedish press than in the Belgian press. No significant differences when it came to welcoming political reactions. And actually, we found quite different reality in terms of the rights for migrants. There we see that the Belgians have more emphasis, put more emphasis on the rights for migrants than the Swedish journalists. And the Belgian newspapers, the Belgian journalists emphasize more the post-arrival integration than the Swedish journalists. And this has to do only with the difference within the country. It's basically the francophone journalists, given their role, given the fact that they're more involved and see themselves as more constructionist in a way, rather than just impartial and independent. So the reason why Sweden is not acting as we hypothesized has to do with the reality in the south of the country. So, partly confirmed, partly rejected. When we looked at negative reactions, here we see that indeed there's more of that in the Belgian newspapers, there's more of that in the Flemish newspapers than in the Francophone newspapers, there's more of that in so when we talk about the unwelcoming political reactions in the Belgian newspapers, economic threats, and threats to security. So hypothesis is confirmed there. When we look at gender balance, indeed, more emphasis on gender balance in the Swedish press than in the Belgian press. Refugees are less often quoted. So here we see, in fact, that the news values are very stable across the countries. No matter what the different perceptions or role perceptions may be of the journalists. So you see indeed that the silencing of refugee actors is a case in both of the countries. But it's more so in Belgium. So refugees are primarily presented as a collectivity instead of as individuals in news articles. Same. No significant difference in Sweden and in Belgium. The Swedish newspapers tend to give more details about the educational background and the family background. We thought the Swedish might put more emphasis on that, but that's not the case. When we now look at the person positivity hypothesis, articles with negative themes have less individualization. That's the case. The opposite is the case too. More positive themes in combinations with more individuals, and no differences across the country. So there again, stability, same performance across the countries. So a lot of confirmation, a lot of things we expected, some unexpected results, but they had to do with the differences within Belgium. So the south versus the north. And we'll look in a minute how that relates to how people think in the south or in the north of the country, think about refugees and immigrants. The second work package was about journalistic cultures. I will not be very detailed about it, but we looked basically at the MyPax indicators, and we combined them with the indicators of the world's journalistic cultures, and we did some correlations and cluster analysis, and you can see here in a nutshell that Sweden and Belgium, well, they perform differently. Here you have like 4 different types of countries, 4 different categories of countries, which have to do with how they perform, poorly or well in terms of the MyPax index, and what is the remedial role, or is there any remedial role that the journalists are willing to take up? And then you see different country categories. And you see that Sweden and Portugal are 2 countries that are very high on the MyPax and are also very high when it comes to remedial roles, constructionist journalistic roles. Journalists are involved, apparently, in these 2 countries. Not so in Belgian reality.
MyPax again?
MyPax is the Migration Integration Policy Index. 38 countries, European countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and basically they compare on 8 kind of themes the policy with regard to migration and integration. Is there any policy on, for instance, nationality? Is there a path? Is there a clear path for learning the language? That kind of issues. Education is part of it, law, legislation. So it's basically an indicator of how, policy-wise, in written documents, these countries have provisions for migrants. But of course, the practice may be very different. It's one indicator. You may be very critical, but it's an indicator.
It's interesting.
So now, looking at how people think, so gauging the public opinion on refugees, asylum seekers, immigrants, and migrants. These were the objectives. Look at the media agenda, look at their perceptions and attitudes. Of course, look at social demographics. Look at various types of traditional and new media use in both countries. See to what extent attitudes to and perceptions of immigrants are affected by use of different media types. So these were mainly the questions. We carried that out in 2 countries, but actually we did it also in France and in the Netherlands. So actually we have 6,000 people interviewed. Well, not interviewed, but through online survey with iVox, a Belgian company who had networks across Europe. So that's something you might be thinking of doing too. It costs very little, actually, 8,000, 9,000 euros for a representative online public opinion survey, population aged 18 to 65, representative for sex, age, region, and nationality. We developed the survey in 3 languages. And we have a few results dealing with, of course, social demographics, news consumption, but also trust in media. We think it's an important mediating variable. Also evaluations of people, of media coverage. Do they think it's too positive? Do they think it's too negative? It's also an interesting variable, rather than just measuring consumption. Attitudes on immigrants, contact theory, extended contact or just mediated contact. Also, we tested the knowledge of immigrants, figures, how many immigrants, refugees they think reside in Belgium. The culture of fear also was also a set of variables and some psychological indicators, basically the big 5. So we didn't work with all of them yet, but what I will show is just a preliminary set of results. So Basically, the research question was, to what extent do media use and trust in media influence people's attitudes and opinions with regard to immigrants and refugees? In what way the two countries are different, similar? And we have a hypothesis: audiences who tend to be more exposed to public service media will hold less negative attitudes and will be less fearful of crime in their public opinion. So when we look at preliminary results, we came across limited differences in attitudes between immigrants and refugees. So we made sure that people knew what the difference was between a refugee and an immigrant with the definitions right away. So that's maybe also something new, relatively new compared to other surveys where it's a bit amalgamated. It's not really clear. In Belgium, there was some evidence that attitudes slightly were more negative towards refugees, which is also kind of bizarre compared to past research. Normally, refugees have a different status. We know we have a responsibility. This is the Convention of Geneva. We signed that. Sweden and Belgium were among the first countries to sign it. But we see more negativism against or towards refugees than towards immigrants. Media use has correlation with attitudes in Belgium only. So there was a positive effect of public broadcasters. We saw it also in France and in the Netherlands. We didn't see it in Sweden, however. It might be interesting to talk a little bit about that. So no difference in terms of media menu. But the public service media was a big, an indicator for a different attitude in 3 of the 4 countries that we looked into. Trust in media correlates positively with attitudes in both countries. So trust in media is, if possible, more important than media consumption as an indicator. In our variances explained, actually trust is more powerful, does more than consumption. In what way Belgium and Sweden are similar or different? Trust in media is far stronger and has a far stronger correlation with attitudes in Sweden than Belgium. Fear of terrorism correlates more strongly with trust in media, as well as attitudes in Belgium and Sweden, and there was no correlation between media use and attitudes. So, but I'll go into some of the results now. We saw some regional differences. Brussels is more positive towards both migrants and refugees. We saw no difference between Flanders and Wallonia. Age, in terms of social demographics, age is a negative indicator. The older, the more negative towards migrants and refugees, and the more negative towards refugees. Education is positive. More education, the more positive one is. And there's also a positive influence of trust in quality newspapers and the quality online news consumption. There's a negative influence when people are more into commercial media consumption and into popular newspaper consumption. We are now into looking at teens. So school surveys, 16 to 17, 18-year-olds. That's ongoing. We want to know also not only the adult population, but what about teens, citizens of the future? What do they think about immigrants and refugees? These are the scales, or some of the scales that we use, trust in media, high Comax alpha, fear of terrorism, all validated scales. We use them from the literature. And attitude towards immigrants and refugees came from the European Social Survey. 0 allow none to live here, 4 allow many to live here. And as I said, the definition was provided of immigrants and refugees. So if we just look for a couple of minutes to some of the results, Sweden shows some influence from the bomb attack in May 2017. These data were collected in September 2017, so they're pretty fresh data. So we see that, people come across news on refugees very often, quite often. And more so, very often, more so in Sweden.
What's the difference between frequently and often?
Sometimes, yeah, very often. Yeah, obviously, very often is more regularly, more.
Not just frequently.
Yeah, sometimes and very often. Maybe let's skip the frequently. Sometimes and often, very often. Yeah, right. Media use. So public broadcast radios and television. More frequent in Belgium than Sweden. Quality newspapers, popular newspapers. So we have a lot of media data, media use data. Trust in media. So trust is kind of a distinguishing feature in Belgium. There's a lot of trust above average, significantly above the average of the trust levels in the media in Europe. Which is, yeah, specific. How important is it for you that immigrants have good educational qualifications, are able to speak the country's official languages, come from a Christian background? So you can see how important it is for Belgians that newcomers speak the language. And in a way, it's more important than the skills and the educational qualifications. So I'll skip these symbolic and economic threat data and refugee attitudes to go to the next word package, because I want to talk about a little bit, just very briefly, about the valorization aspect that I started with. And this is done by our Brussels team. They are working on visuals, push and pull factors in migration, perceived well-being in Belgium among the Syrian, Iraqi, and Afghan refugees that we interviewed, and the role also of mobile and social media. There will be a Swedish fonda in this part. The goal is, as I said, to develop a public exhibition, including materials from the visual participatory project. So we started out with, or they started out, the Brussels team and the team from Louvain-la-Neuve, with a biographic interview, life story. What is the well-being? How do they consider the integration infrastructure in the part of the country they are residing? They held visual interviews about media representations, and they were asked to categorize photographic media coverage. I'll show you how that was done. And they were also asked to talk back to the journalists, to the photographers, and to the policy people. Talk back to the Secretary of State of Asylum. So these were the key themes. So for instance, here they were shown all kinds of images, and they had to categorize the images that they perceived as negative, positive, or weird. And it seemed that they really wanted to see emphasis put on the effort they took to come, the harshness of the journey that they went through to come. Iconic pictures were shown to them, and they were asked to add some reactions to the pictures in the word cloud. So this is all meant to show at the end of the project. So this was, for instance, a message on a postcard here, sent to Theo Franken, who is our Secretary of State. Possibility to talk back. Do you see how much people suffer to get to Belgium? Losing too many things for just life. Live a normal life, so there's no need for more negative decisions. They have more observations than that, and they are the specialists in terms of visual photo elicitation. So, but it was clear that they wanted more representation of the humanity, human beings, as was mentioned also by Karina yesterday, the relations that they have with other people, with other family members, for instance, humans rather than the status they're in, the differences depending on the steps in the asylum procedure. So a creative moment, a few hours together, with these people and hopefully material that we can exhibit. There will be a comparative aspect also with the Swedish data. Academic dissemination, of course, is what we are aiming at. A website, and as I said, also that exhibit. We have some articles already out, and this is the plan, the traveling public exhibit. And there's also a call for papers. If you want to be part of that, there's this online only media and communication journal. There's a special issue on media and minorities coming out. Abstracts are awaited by February 28th, so it's an open access journal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for rushing through it.